All right. Well, we're finally back, guys. We've had a few weeks off because we went to the conference, and now, well, us three, and then Joel, he was in Idaho.
It's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so yeah, so it's good to see you guys here getting back. I had a lot of people ask me, like, hey, when are you going to do the next study? I was like, after the conference. So that's been good. Here's what we're going to do today, guys. We're going to go on into Revelation 11. If you remember Revelation 10, we ended where he was eating the scroll. Now we're getting into Revelation 11. We've decided we're going to go through the first 14 verses and probably stop there. However, if we do get far enough and we can finish the remaining five, then we'll get into it. But for right now, that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to read the first 14 verses of Revelation chapter 11. Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there, but do not measure the court outside the temple. Did somebody say something?
Nope.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just heard something errant there. But do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, for it is given over to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. And I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone would harm them, fire pours from their mouth and consumes their foes. If anyone would harm them, this is how he is doomed to be killed. They have the power to shut the sky, that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying, and they have power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire. And when they have finished their testimony, the beast that rises from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that symbolically is called Sodom in Egypt, where their Lord was crucified. For 3.5 days, some of the peoples and tribes and languages and nations will gaze at their dead bodies and refuse to let them be placed in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and make merry and exchange presents, because these 2 prophets had been a torment to those who dwell on the earth. But after the 3.5 days, a breath of life from God entered them, and they stood up on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies watched them. And at that hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe has passed. Behold, the third woe is. And that's it for the first 14 verses.
Amen. Rick, there's a little bit of a feedback or an echo on you.
I've noticed.
Significant, but I don't know if it's a quick fix or not. But
yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. Zach's still there. I think he's just doing audio.
Okay. Can you hear us, Zach?
Do you have like a noise canceling? Sometimes I think in the audio section there might be a little.
Am I echoing on you guys? Are you hearing it too?
It was when you were reading. I heard that a little bit too.
Yeah.
I don't hear it right now, so maybe it's okay.
Okay. I've got y'all. Do y'all have me?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. We got you.
You look a lot better like this, so that's good.
All right.
Yeah. Give me just a second. I'm trying to let my internet catch up. I got a lot going on over here.
Okay. No problem.
All right.
So there is.
I mean, y'all carry on, but I'm just
okay.
So there's a lot just in the first verse.
Right.
So if you don't mind, maybe we can just kind of unpack 3, or at least 2 major things here. He says, then I was given a measuring rod. So we have the concept of measuring. And then we have this temple, and we need to break this down and find where these themes are found elsewhere in Revelation and also in the Old Testament. We've talked about this before, that the temple here, the Greek word is naos. And as we'll see here, every time it's used in Revelation, it is referring to the most holy place part of the temple. If you don't mind, I just want to unpack this real quick.
Yeah.
It first starts in Revelation 3:12. The one who is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple, Greek naos, of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God. That's the New Jerusalem. Remember, that's that perfect cubed, most holy place, dwelling of God, which is coming down from heaven. So there's a connection here between the saints. When Christ comes, they're going to inherit the New Jerusalem, which is a perfect cube, which becomes the new temple, so to speak. Then in chapter 7, we saw this. One of the elders asked me, "These in white robes, who are they? And where did they come from?" I answered, "Sir, you know." And he said, "These are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore, they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night." Again, that's an idiom for eternality. "In his temple," Greek naos. So remember the temple structure. The holy place is a reference to the land of Israel, and the most holy place is where God dwells, the spiritual realm. All right. And this is where we're seeing at the end of the tribulation, the saints are raised, and they're on top of Mount Zion in chapter 14. And remember, we can't separate tribulation from resurrection, Daniel 12. Right after the tribulation of Daniel 12:1, we have the resurrection. So they come through the tribulation, they're on Mount Zion, they're raised. They're in the most holy place presence of God. And it talks about never again are they going to hunger or thirst. That's John 6:35. If you believe in me, you will never hunger, you'll never thirst. So they're inheriting eternal life. This is just a picture of resurrection, of the consummation scene that again is recapitulated. And then he's going to wipe away every tear. And he says that he's going to comfort them with his presence. So again, the most holy place, God's presence, they're equivalent. And then in this chapter, in verse 19, then God's temple, Greek naos, in heaven was opened. And then you have the concept of the ark being seen. Again, most holy place, part of the temple. And then lastly, Revelation 21, we have the theme of the measuring, just like we have here, but it's measuring that perfect cube, the most holy place, the city of the living God. And again, measuring is discussing protection or building up, especially when we're following Ezekiel, right? The little scroll in Revelation 10, we saw that he was tracking on Ezekiel. And then now we have the measuring of this perfect cubed city temple that's coming right out of Ezekiel 37, chapters 40 to 48. And this is the most holy place. So anything outside of the most holy place is trampled. If you're not a part of the new covenant system that is being protected by God, the rest, the old covenant city, the physical temple, all of it, and the city is going to be trodden down. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, that's good. One of the things that I had picked up on was, okay, so he's measuring, and he tells them, do not, in verse 2, he says, do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, for it is given over to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. Well, what was unique, I was looking into this. So we know that there's no Gentile court ever mentioned in the tabernacle. There's no Gentile court ever mentioned in Solomon's temple. There's not even a Gentile court mentioned during the rebuilt temple, the time of Zerubbabel. So this is something that's been added on, this Gentile court that gets added on during the Herodian dynasty. So this is the outside area, and this is the place that Jesus would go and would cleanse. Yeah. And so this is kind of like, exactly. So this is the place that Jesus went, and it is the covenant people that have begun to turn the Father's house into a house of, a den of thieves. And what they're doing is, because the Gentile nations that were around were, some were God-fearing. It said there were some God-fearing Gentiles in the area that were coming in, but they weren't able to go into the inner courts. Whereas in the past, the temple was separated by like the priests and then also the regular, Israelites. So this is like one extension that comes out during the Herodian dynasty. So what's really cool is that where this measuring rod is taking place, he says, don't measure that place because it's going to be trampled. Well, that just happens to be where the apostate covenant Israel is going to be, because they're going to be trampled there. They're not allowed into the most holy place, which is a combination of, there's neither Jew nor Gentile. This is this true temple.
Just to follow up on that, sometimes the measuring line we would think of, like more how we would think of measuring something, but that can also be something that's used in judgment, or like a plumb line used in judgment. So like this is one text. This is Lamentations 2, 7, and 8. And part of it says, the Lord has purposed to destroy the wall of the daughter of Zion, stretched out a line. He has not withdrawn his hand from destroying. And so it kind of goes along with that, or this one section of protection, but then judgment is going to come on the other section. So
yeah,
it depends on the context what the measuring is.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Like with Zechariah 2, when they do the measuring line, that is for protection, like in blessing, in Zechariah 2. So you're right. It just depends on which way it's being measured. But this one is in particular, this is where judgment will take place. And the Gentiles are going to trample that place that they'd added on. And that's where apostate Israel is going to be. Jesus warned them when he cleansed it.
So speaking of Jesus and this passage, and of course, Revelation is John's version of the Olivet Discourse. So the parallel is obviously Luke 21. Now, this is a passage that is taken out of context on a regular basis, whether it's dispensationalists or even reformed guys. The times of let me read this. Luke 21:24. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot. All right. By the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And this is often they connect it to Romans 11 somehow.
Right.
And they think that after AD 70, well, this is the times of the Gentiles. But the whole context of Luke 21 is God's judgment. It's the nation, it's Rome surrounding Jerusalem and trotting her down. And you can see the parallels between Revelation 11, Luke 21, and Daniel 12:7. It's for Daniel asked, when are all these things going to take place? The tribulation, the resurrection, the appointed time of the end, knowledge increasing. And he is told it's going to take place for 3.5 years when the power of the holy people is completely shattered. Now you have the holy city, Revelation 11:2, that is referring to Old Covenant Jerusalem. But you're saying, but they're apostate. That's just a proper name for Israel or for Jerusalem. Okay, it can still be holy even though they're apostate. And then in Revelation 12:7, he's shattering the holy people. Well, they're still apostate Jews, but here they're called the holy people. He's shattering them, and he's shattering their holy city for 3.5 years. So clearly the times of the Gentiles is going back to that 3.5 years. And I think Joel mentioned Lamentation 1:15. He picks up this shattering concept and the trotting down. He says this: the Lord has rejected all my strong men in my midst. He has called an appointed time against me to crush my young men. The Lord has trodden, of course, you're going to be thinking of Revelation 14, and you should. The Lord has trodden as in a winepress the virgin daughter, Jerusalem of Judah. Now, in the Jewish Targum adds this: to shatter them. Again, it's a play off of Daniel 12:7. So looking back at a past event, that's Babylon's military desolation of Jerusalem, which was about 3 years, between 589 to 586. This was an appointed time when the Lord had trodden down Jerusalem and shattered her during the military trotting down of Babylon, of Jerusalem, and the temple. Jesus in Luke 21 and John in Revelation 11 here and chapter 14 are drawing upon the language of Lamentation 1:15 and the prophecy of Daniel 12:4-7 as the appointed time when Jerusalem would be trodden down or shattered during that 3.5 year period between AD 67 and 70.
Yeah, that's good, Mike. Yeah. Anybody else have anything they want to add before we move on?
No, I was just
Daniel
going to
9,
say, oh, go ahead, Zach.
Daniel 9:24 says 70 weeks are determined for your people and your holy city.
Mm-hmm.
Holy city and your people. Holy people, holy city. Exactly.
It's there's the contrast to me. I think the way I've got it is the beloved, okay, the beloved city or the saints versus the holy city in the book of Revelation. That's just kind of how I'm thinking about it right now. I don't know if that's completely going to hold true all the way through, but seems like beloved city or saints is the righteous, and holy city is a reference back to the old covenant people.
Yeah, we'll pick that up in Revelation 20 when we kind of see, you know, Armageddon, here Revelation 11, the war. And because you have the righteous still within it's like a city within a city. The righteous are still in the city and they come against it, right? But then the righteous leave. But we'll talk about that when we get there. But I know exactly what you're talking about. But as far as your point, perfect. You know, I think it's amillennial Simon Kistemacher was like, preterists can't be right because in Revelation 11, you know, it's the holy city. And well, you know, that's how Daniel describes the holy people, the holy city being judged in AD 70. So I think John is on good footing there.
I mean, even Jesus says when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, he's calling it that place. And yet that's the place that's going to be decimated. So Kistemacher, why would he even think that way? That's bizarre.
Well, that's why we destroyed him in House Divided.
I was just gonna say a couple things. One, and maybe we all have this background, but you mentioned, Mike, about this period of the Gentiles, and I had this idea at one point. Well, I started as a dispensationalist, and then I was more reformed. So I had this idea that some indeterminate period of time that we were apparently in and would go on till Jesus came back would be that why even designate a period of time if it's just, you know, this undefined period that nobody even knows what it is. And the other thing I was going to ask is for you guys, because this is one of the texts that's often used to date Revelation pre-AD 70. I just wondered if anybody wanted to speak to that because of the temple being there, or do you think maybe that's not a real strong argument and there are other better ones?
As far as measuring the temple itself, the fact that it's there to be measured.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the idea is, well, some people will say, well, this is a vision.
Right.
But he's saying leave out the Gentile courts. That is evidence. That is evidence of Herod's temple.
Yeah,
and by the way, they found that. And
there's been this huge, you know, crescendo where we're getting closer and closer to this, you know, this imminent destruction. So it seems to me it's good evidence for a pre AD 70 writing.
They're going to put Gentile courts in the future rebuilt temple, Rick.
Yeah, they found where they were, so they're going to go ahead and hammer down.
Are they going to have separate? Are they going to have separate Gentile utensils?
Would you believe that in the late 90s that I actually donated money to have a cornerstone made?
Wow, bless your heart.
Yeah, isn't that terrible? I have that on my conscience for the rest of my life.
At Calvary Chapel, I mean, we passed around the offering plate, you know, to help Israel rebuild the temple. I remember that. It's like complete idolatry, man.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
There's one cornerstone, it's Christ, and
That's
the foundation is the apostles and the prophets.
I'm just thankful that the Lord taught me that. I'm glad that he taught me that.
Amen.
Yeah, it's good stuff. All right, guys. So let's move on. We're going to go to verse 3 now. Okay. And I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Let me go ahead and finish 4. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth.
So what are some of the theories? Maybe you guys come up with some that I haven't. But some say it's Enoch and Elijah. Some say Moses and Elijah, Jeremiah and Elijah, Joshua and Caleb, Peter and Paul, John the Baptist and Jesus, John and brother James, Stephen and James of Zebedee, Peter and James. And some, I think we're getting closer to the truth, representative of Jew and Gentile church. I wouldn't pick that one, but I lean in that direction that the commentators are divided on if it's referring to 2 individuals, which it's not, or symbolic of the church's testimony, which I would head in that direction. Is two witnesses, but those two witnesses are representative of other individuals and concepts other than two literal people. I mean, that's kind of my take.
What about Ephesians 2 when it talks about the unity of one new man? Does that tie into the Jew Gentile idea?
Yes, sir. That's where I was heading. Good job. Yep.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, because what is going on in this temple? What's going to be, leave out the Gentile court, but yet we do know that Jew and Gentile make up this new temple. There's now neither Jew nor Gentile, right? That's what it says. So it's making that up. I think that the lampstands and the olive trees are representations of that, these two witnesses. That's what I thought.
Well, let's break down each concept, and then we'll see if we can identify what these two witnesses are or what they represent. So the first thing is they're dressed in sackcloth, which obviously John the Baptist is the Elijah who they were expecting was about to come. So there could be a connection between Elijah or John the Baptist. And Jesus, of course, in Matthew 11 says John the Baptist is the Elijah who was about to come. Then we have the concept of two olive trees and lampstands. I don't know where your thoughts went, but I went to Zechariah 3 and 4.
Well, I like how you have the Joshua, the ruling high priest, and Zerubbabel. I think also of Moses and Aaron, like this constant theme that you see, like coming out of Egypt and when they're approaching and then coming out, and then here with Joshua and Zerubbabel towards the second temple. So it's just this theme that keeps running out. And I think that the churches in Asia Minor, that they're going to recall this, right? They're going to think back to these two witnesses, and that this is something unique. And we're talking about the temple right now. So this is something that's unique. These two witnesses are there for it.
Okay, so we're talking about the destruction of one temple, and you were talking about Jew, Gentile, and the new temple. But these could be two figures because they're rebuilding the second temple, right? Mm-hmm. It's these two figures. We have the priestly and we have the kingly or government, and both of these figures are instrumental in restoring Israel back into the land and rebuilding the temple. So I think that's kind of a picture of Christ being king and priest, and then the church being a royal priesthood, and us being the temple, right?
Zach's got something.
Yeah.
Why does nobody ever say that it's the Son and the Spirit, which are the two witnesses? Who's the agent of restoration? They asked him, Lord, at this time, will you restore the kingdom to the Father? He says, go and wait on the Spirit, just like you just had on the page there. If it's the Son,
so the Spirit dies in the street. That's probably why.
Listen to me. You're saying, you just said that it was the Son in the church. The Spirit lives within the bride, who is the church. And if you go back to the unpardonable sin, he says, if you reject the Son, then you'll be forgiven. But if you reject the Son and the Spirit, then you won't be forgiven. There's two witnesses. And then Jesus tells them at that time, you will be my witnesses, and they're waiting on the restoration, which is going to come through the Spirit. So no, I'm connecting it with the church, but I think Son, Spirit, Son, church, I'm with you there. That just all flows together. But I never hear anybody say, well, it's the Son and the Spirit, or the Son and the church.
I have, Zach. I heard you preach on it once. I did. I heard you preach on it once about the two witnesses.
Oh, to have more people of understanding, Rick.
Well, I think we'll see that the church recapitulates the work of Christ. And I think that's kind of the concept.
So if with that idea of it being, Son and the Spirit, or maybe, Zach also mentioned Ephesians 2 and that coming together and the one in humanity, in that kind of context, do you guys see it more as the overall period of the forming and maturing of the church, like the whole second Exodus period, or would you still relegate that more to, to these few years leading up to where we are?
It's the testimony of the law and the prophets bearing witness against Jerusalem. That's pretty much what it is. Even that's what Jesus said. He says, you don't need me to condemn you. You have Moses to condemn you. So I see this as the testimony of the law and the prophets against them. John the Baptist preached there was a wrath that was about to come. This is the covenantal wrath coming against them that the law and the prophets foretold. But
Here's
Now
how I
let
got
me
it,
ask. Go ahead,
Joe.
Zach.
Joe, here's how I got it. I see this based on the text in Revelation 11. It seems like this ties you to the 42 months. But what I think happens is the two witnesses, the Son and the Spirit, or the Son and the Spirit through the church here, they have their heyday as Satan's bound. But once Paul the restrainer there was taken out of the
Oh,
way,
that's where we're going.
then
Okay.
they're hey,
That's why
Joe,
all this is.
Joe, then they're overcome and they're trampled down for that 3.5 years, but there's a resurrection at the end of it when that holy city is judged. So that's the way I got it right there, Joe.
All right. All right. Real quick, one of the things I did hear, I think I shared this because I was talking to Rick a couple days ago, but I don't know if I shared it with everybody, is that somebody's really appreciated. We get a lot of good feedback about this, is that this guy told me it's really cool that you guys sometimes will even disagree with each other or say, hey, I'm studying this, but I'm not sure yet. And this guy's like, I've never heard people teach stuff that would actually have the humility to say that. So we are incredible because of how humble we are.
That's right. I can't expect these guys to be on the same level. I just have
That's right.
Man.
Okay, so I think most commentators, and I would fall in line with them, that this is the law and the prophets, that the main imagery here, other than Joshua and Zerubbabel, would be Moses and Elijah, just because of how they're clothed, the fire, and so forth. So let's just go through this real quick because it is the predominant view. Moses in Numbers 16:35, fire came down from heaven and consumed false worshipers and those that had rebelled against his anointed leadership. So Jesus is the new Moses, and the church is the new Israel of God, and the old covenant Jerusalem is rejecting that, and they're the ones guilty of false religion and false worship. So of course fire is going to come down and devour them. Same with Elijah. These guys are the false prophets, right? Old covenant apostate Jerusalem, they're the false prophets. So we have fire coming down and devouring them. We have power to shut up the sky and turn water to blood. Again, that's Elijah, and it's also Moses again. And of course, Josephus in wars. We talked about this, with the second Exodus motif, that the water really did turn to blood. I mean, they tried to escape, and the Romans were right there waiting for them and just totally destroyed them. But if you guys have any other to identify two witnesses that kind of fits this description, go for it.
I wouldn't mind giving my thoughts on power to shut up the sky. In verse 6, when it talks about how they have the power to shut up the heavens so that no rain falls. Well, if you follow Deuteronomy 32, let my teaching fall as rain, my speech distill as the dew. Hebrews 6 does the same thing with it. Hebrews 13 does it. Revelation 12, she's pouring this poisonous water out of her mouth. We'll get there. I think this idea that there's no more rain that's fallen is the same idea at the end of Revelation 22, where it says, let those who are doing this, let them do it. Like, essentially, the proclamation of the word is stopped during this time. Like, their time for repentance was over, and you got this 3.5 years where judgment's coming. So you don't have the work of God that's there, though. Maybe that could hit that. Y'all may think that's the dumbest thing you've ever heard.
No, I just think that the two witnesses here are the faithful church who fulfills the law and the prophets. But because Old Covenant Jerusalem did not heed the law and the prophets that foretold the true Jerusalem, the true people, now those covenant curses are coming on them. And the two witnesses represent the church the church's testimony of the law and the prophets. That's kind of how I see it. But
I agree with everything you just said.
okay.
So all right, so if you're saying it like that, then once they are killed and then they are resurrected after the 3.5 days, you're showing that that's the resurrection, right?
Oh yeah.
I think so.
It's also the rapture. We'll get
Right.
there. Yeah.
Right. Got it.
Okay, so Zach, you had some comments when they finished their testimony. So this seems to be the church's testimony in fulfilling the Great Commission before Christ came to close the Old Covenant age. That was fulfilled before the war. So, and then the beast rises from the pit and conquers and kills them. This would seem to be the Pharisees, the Zealots, and the Romans came up against the Christians primarily between AD 63 and 68 is where you have this real intense persecution and a lot of the martyrdom. And in Daniel 7, it does talk about there would be this intense persecution, and even some of the saints would die because the little horn wages war against them and prevails, indicating that there would be death and persecution right before the Son of Man comes and the saints inherit the kingdom.
Yeah. So speaking of them finishing their testimony, so I agree with all of what you just said. During that time, in the 3.5 years, I think there's this idea the commission's fulfilled, and I think we agree the commission's fulfilled by the time the tribulation starts. I mean,
Absolutely.
when they finish their testimony, and I think that's why, like in Revelation 22:11, you read, "He who is unjust, let him be unjust still. He who is filthy, let him be filthy still. He who is righteous, let him be righteous still. He who is holy, let him be holy still." Essentially,
Time's up.
it's time's up. It's over. Like they've had long enough. We've finished the testimony.
No more delay, right?
Right.
Exactly.
All
Joe,
right.
you got anything there, bud?
No, I it's good, and I think just because so much of Revelation in John's brilliance of writing it, through what he's been told, like on these witnesses, I tend to lean. I think the law and the law and prophets are there regardless of whether it's something more specific at times. But I think it's a lot of this imagery, and a lot of these pictures kind of come together. So it's not that we shouldn't try to nail that down, but I just think so much Revelation incorporates all these things, and sometimes we want to color inside the lines so specifically. Right. And I don't know that John's always doing that, so I just always try to keep that in my thought process too. But the law, there's no doubt in my mind that the general theme is the law and the prophets and the witness of the church, and however that all goes together, if that makes sense. So
absolutely, and because it's drawing upon all these Old Testament concepts, that's why Joshua and Zerubbabel, the lampstands, also kind of, if you're a Jew, you're getting this,
Right.
It's just most Christians aren't familiar with their Old Testament, so they're just like, what?
I don't see that as a contradiction, like to combine some of the things that we said. Like, so I don't deny that law and the prophets. I think the law and the prophets predicted this forming of this one new man. Are we all in agreement though that we don't think this is two literal physical people that were alive from 66 to 70 AD?
We do not.
Definitely.
I do not.
Yeah, we're in agreement on that. That's definitely not the case. Nor is this a physical rapture, either in AD 66 or at the end of world history or whatever. And we'll get to that here in a minute. But
yeah, and you almost have to, because I was going over like Russell Parasio, and I know he's got some differences, like when you get chapter 20 and stuff. But I mean, his book it ain't bad. There's a lot of good stuff in there. But he has Peter and James, because he was pretty convinced it had to be specific people. But he acknowledges we don't know exactly what happened, but because he saw some sort of a physical rapture, it's like you almost have to have both those things together if you've got two individual people that then would literally be taken up and ascended. So I think if you don't have that, then you don't have to have the individual people.
Well, I think it takes you back to even Ezekiel 37 when it talks about how they had life breathed back into them, and in such a futurist mindset, that's always a physical breathing of life that comes back in instead of it being something spiritual and restoration.
You're just jumping ahead, aren't you?
Sorry.
You're just jumping ahead. All right, we're getting there. We're getting there to the rapture, quote unquote, and the resurrection, but we got to identify where they're slain, right? So of course, this is a big one. It's not a big one for us. We know this, but there are a lot of new people that are listening. And this is just huge. If you do not know what the great city is or the time texts and all of that, you're just not going to understand the book of Revelation. So what is this great city? Obviously, he says where the Lord's crucified. I think that's a pretty dead giveaway. But there are really three places. I used to think there was only two. Babylon and Jerusalem were called the great city in scripture, but actually there's a third. In the Septuagint of Joshua 6, 1-27, Jericho is labeled the great city. And there are some awesome parallels here in Revelation 7 with that. Also in ancient literature, Jerusalem was called the great city before and during the time Revelation was written. And even, of course, Josephus refers to Jerusalem as the great city. But do you guys mind if I go over these parallels with Joshua real quick?
No, go for it.
Okay. Because Jericho is identified as the great city, all right, in the Septuagint, Old Covenant Jerusalem is the great city. Why is that important? Because the Israelites could not inherit the land. There was something massive in front of them, a major obstacle that had to take place. Jericho, the great city, had to be judged before they could inherit the land and the promises. So in the book of Revelation, before the saints could inherit God's presence, before they could be brought into the most holy place and inherit the new Jerusalem and the new creation and be raised, that this city had to be judged. They had to overcome this city. So that's parallel number one. In Jericho, the presence of silver, gold, bronze, iron, and a Babylonian garment that seduced Achan points to its wealth and moral corruption. In Revelation, in Babylon, elements such as gold, silver, bronze, iron, and the seductive use of a scarlet and purple symbolize the defilement of apostate Jerusalem. 3. Now this is kind of interesting where we are now. 2 witnesses are sent to Jericho. When the king attempts to kill them, Rahab hides them for 3 days. Some people see this, I think Lightheart develops this as a death. They're being hidden underneath whatever it is she hid them on. Hides them for 3 days before they return to Joshua. The 2 witnesses here in our chapter are sent to Old Covenant Jerusalem, or Jericho. They are slain, but rise after 3 days and return to Jesus, Yeshua, or Joshua. Okay. And then the battle commences when Joshua submits before the Lord, and the angel of the Lord appears with a sword. In Revelation, the conflict begins as John submits before Christ, who is depicted with a sword, his word flowing from his mouth. 5, before Jericho is judged, Rahab and her family are spared. Rahab later becomes part of the lineage of Joshua and ultimately of Jesus. 5, on the other side, before Jerusalem is judged, a righteous remnant flees to Pella and is saved, preserving the promise of inheritance. And then, of course, 6, Jericho is defeated after a set of 3 sevens are accomplished. Again, this is chapters 10 and chapter 11 of Revelation. Jerusalem is, of course, they circle the city once 7 days. On the 7th day, they circled the city 7 times. 3, on the 7th day, 7 trumpets are blown. And then in Revelation, Jerusalem is defeated after a set of 3 sevens are accomplished. Jesus opens the book of 7 seals. The 7th seal gives rise to 7 trumpets. At the sound of the 7th trumpet, Jerusalem falls within 1 hour. So we're really tracking here on Jericho being the great city, just like Babylon was a great city. And I think that is that's really cool. There's a couple other parallels, but I don't want to.
That's good work, Mike. That's really good.
Great. Thank you.
And that's Warren Gage's material. He does a great job on that. I mean, his books on the typology there are like second to none. So I just wanted to give him credit on that.
Very good.
That's still a good find in the Septuagint, though. Did you find that?
No, he brought that out. It is absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you guys talk about the beast that rises out of the bottomless pit?
No.
Okay. I didn't think so.
What do you got on that?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, I did a lot. I've actually been reading a lot of Roman history, like at that time, like from Roman historians, like Pliny the Younger and Suetonius and all them. And I was, is this bottomless pit beast? Do you see this as being Rome at this point?
I'd say land beast. I'd see more Jerusalem.
So you put it to, okay. So, all right. Okay. That's fine. Then I'm going to hold my own right now. I'll bring that up later.
I was just going to say, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit too, but just to bring it back to that great city, because it is so important. And that was one of my, that was one of my huge sort of puzzle pieces, like border pieces, to coming to this view was who is this Babylon? And I was just in a conversation with a local pastor the other day because I'm getting to know some local pastors and stuff, and we were having a different conversation. But he talks a lot about like how do you live in Babylon? He's kind of a partial preterist, sees it as some kind of system. And I just said, well, you could become full preterist and you know who Babylon was, and that'll solve your problem. And you can figure out we just live in the kingdom, And he kind of said something for a minute, and he's like, wait a minute, come back to that. And then I went over some of the stuff, and he's like, I think I need a long walk to think about this. I mean, it's a great thing because you kind of bring up, you get to 17 and 18, which is clearly about Babylon, and you see that Old Covenant Jerusalem was referred to as Egypt and Sodom, and then Babylon, and then you go to this verse in chapter 11, and it's pretty hard to, I don't think you can refute it, unless you just don't like it. So.
Well, you bring up a good point. This great city, it's later talked about as Babylon in chapter 17, 18. But where else in Scripture is a city called Sodom? I think it starts obviously in Deuteronomy 32:32. For there, that is Israel's vine, comes from the vine of Sodom. Isaiah 1:1 and verse 10, the vision of Isaiah concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. So clearly, and then Jeremiah 23, talking about Jerusalem and the prophets there, they've become like Sodom. So if you're a Jew, you could totally understand that if your city becomes apostate, you're like Sodom. I don't see any other countries described as Sodom in the Old Testament. Maybe I'm missing something, but all of these references clearly reference Old Covenant Jerusalem with Sodom.
Yeah. And if that is who it is, and there's other textual evidence too, but that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt when it was written, because you have to have Babylon there still, to destroy them, and it puts Revelation back in the Bible. I mean, and for me, it was pretty mind blowing. So Babylon is huge.
Yeah. Now it's also called spiritually Egypt, and this is what David Chilton wrote. He says commentators are generally unable to find Bible references comparing Israel or Jerusalem to Egypt. But this is the old problem of not being able to see the forest for the trees. For the proof is contained in the whole message of the New Testament. Jesus is constantly regarded as the new Moses, the new Israel, the new temple, and in fact, a living recapitulation, transcendence of the entire history of the Exodus. And we've already looked at all of the Exodus themes, the plagues. It's so clear.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then where was the Lord crucified? Because that's what the text says. Luke 13. Nevertheless, I must go on my way today and tomorrow and the day following, for it cannot be that a prophet should perish away from Jerusalem. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. So pretty clear that it's Old Covenant Jerusalem.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then of course we'll get into the sea beast later on as we study this, right? Which is definitely more Rome, correct? Is that the way you would interpret it? That's coming later. But a lot of the stuff that I was looking at, the war, I'll say it at the end. Sorry. Let's keep going because we're at 45 minutes.
Say it.
Huh?
Say it.
No, it's just that the imperial power of Rome at this time they're about to go into civil war. They're going to civil war at the end of this war. Okay. So in AD 69, Rome is in like complete civil war. And you've got Vespasian, who has already been at this place where he's the one that sends them, like Cestius Gallus, to the city when you see the city surrounded, right? And then they come in. You've got Vespasian, who was a general, but then later he goes back and he ends up becoming emperor. And it's Titus that comes back and does this massive work. And whenever the temple's destroyed, it's Titus that's there. He wants to save the temple so that he can turn it into a temple for his father. That's the whole idea. After it's completely destroyed, later on, Rome will actually put in this thing called the Fiscus Judaicus, and it's a tax, and they basically make all of the Jews pay for the temple of Jupiter in Rome, but they just destroyed theirs. And
you're connecting all this to the beast coming up on the earth.
Yes, that's just something that, because later, but see, then again, it's just because I know what's coming later, because the beast that was and is not, and then comes back. You know what I mean? Like it kind of follows like what is actually happening to Rome itself, especially Nero's Rome, like at that time. But then, of course, go ahead.
Is this Revelation 11 text, in y'all's opinion, parallel to Revelation 20 when they come up, when they surround this camp and the beast comes up on the earth? I mean, is this not the same thing?
Being recapitulated later in 20?
Yeah.
Well, definitely the judgment of the dead is. I mean, that would definitely be the end of the millennium. I mean, verse 18. I would have to think about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm not trying to throw a monkey wrench in. It's just something that I was seeing just because of history of Rome at the time. And by the way, whenever you hear the skeptics and everybody say, you know, like, why did the destruction of Jerusalem matter to people around the world? Well, I'm going to tell you, it was a huge deal to Rome. It's all over their history, man, everywhere. It's covered by not only, you got Josephus on one side, but you have Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, Pliny the Younger. They all write about this because of the civil war that's going on in Rome and just how important it is to Rome. So it's a big deal. What happens to the Jews is massive for Rome. It's huge. And Vespasian, by the way, becomes the emperor because of his success.
It kind of comes down to who the witnesses are, what the 3.5 years is referring to. You know what I mean?
Yes.
To try and get some chronology here, because I'm placing this persecution and the death of these two witnesses as the martyrdom of the church.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and her testimony. And it seems like the martyrdom really picks up between 63 to 68. And the Jews are the primary source of persecution and death. And they're even responsible for riding the beast. And Nero was married to a Jewess. We know that there are a bunch of Jews that go to Nero basically and pressure him to persecute the Christians. So even if you do see Rome in here somewhere, the Jews are behind it. They're the ones that are really, you know, killing and
but yeah, but there's this glaring thing that keeps popping out to me, which is that Jesus warned them and told them to flee. So why are they even there in the first place? Aren't they already gone?
Well, again, that's why we're trying to find what this symbolizes. So if the two witnesses are prophesying for 3.5 years, is this possibly just a picture of the end result of them prophesying that here comes this wrath for this 3.5 years? And as that wrath is being poured out for that 3.5 years, we have another picture of this also being the time where the church is coming out of a state of tribulation and shame and being glorified and exalted. You know, I don't really know. I don't know with 100% certainty because of the timeline and what's symbolic, you know, and it's a little bit of a struggle.
Can I say how I've got this in like 45 seconds?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would take the two witnesses to be a connection to Christ and the church, or the Christ and the Spirit. Okay. Satan is bound during this time. According to Revelation 20, Satan is locked into the bottomless pit, the same bottomless pit that we have in Revelation 11. I can't help but see Satan as Old Covenant Israel in this. She's bound so that the work of the Judaizers can't overcome the work of the church, and the gospel spreads in the first century. Then the church is killed, just like you said a while ago, Mike. When they hit them for 3.5 days, they considered they were dead. I think that's what you said, that Gage said. Same idea. The church was dead for that 3.5 years. But right at the end, once she's finished her testimony, that's when the beast comes back to life, who I've taken as Israel, the same as in Revelation 20, out of the bottomless pit, and she's coming to attack the church for those 3.5 years, and that's our work. But it's going to end with her being destroyed. The reason, Rick, I don't think that beast in Revelation 11 can be Rome is because I think 11 and 20 are parallel, and the beast gets burned up in 20. So if Rome's the
Right.
beast, he's the
It
one
can't be
doing the
Rome.
burning. He can't be the one getting burned up.
You're exactly right.
Rome is the instrument of the fire, because in Matthew 22:7, he says, I am going to send my army and burn the city. So they're the instrument that brings the fire.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah.
That makes sense, Zach. You're right. I'm glad you clarified that, because being that it's recapitulated in 20, it has to be Old Covenant. It has to be. Yeah, that's a good point. All right. This is what this study's about, right? We're learning.
Yeah.
I see a lot less Rome than I used to. Even when we get to the sea beast deal and when we get to Revelation 20, I'm fixing to probably disagree with y'all charitably all over the place. But I know less probably about Revelation 13 than anything in the sea beast.
Well, you know what they say, Revelation's the easiest book to study. That's what I've heard. So let's see where we are. Do you have anything else, Mike?
Well, we definitely see Rome in this, because Rome is the Gentile nations that's treading down the city. So Rome is there because Rome is in Luke 21. They're the Gentiles, they're the nations, right? So that's not the Judaizers, that's not even the Zealots. So Rome is there. It's tricky. And that's why I like Zach, because he's thinking on another train. I picked that train up. I tried to make it work in Daniel, like for the longest time. Like the fourth beast was just Old Covenant Jerusalem and Rome. And then I started seeing I can't do that in all these other passages. So, but I get it.
Herod's got to come into this thing somewhere.
What's that?
I think the Herods have got to come into this thing somewhere, and I don't know how they fit, but they're too prevalent in the New Testament. Let me ask you all this. In verse 9, when it says, "Then those people from the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations will see their dead bodies and not allow their dead bodies to be put into graves," what does that mean? Does that mean that the peoples from the nations are for the two witnesses, or are they against the two witnesses? I don't know what that means.
Yes.
Go ahead, Rick.
No, I was saying you got it right here. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, let's see what I wrote on this a long time ago, so I have to see if I've changed my mind or not. So let's see the 3.5 days. Okay, I think Warren Gage makes a good connection there with the two spies, and I think that Beale also tracks on something interesting here. But could it be a corporate and apocalyptic recapitulation of the dying and rising with Christ? Remember, Paul said, fill up what was lacking in the sufferings of Christ. Could that be the picture here? And being united in his death and resurrection. G.K. Beale writes this. I think this is where he gets into the corporate body, or maybe not. Let's see. The 3.5 day period during which the bodies are observed evokes the period Christ was in the tomb, though that was only 3 days. The further figuratively identifies the witnesses with Christ, the faithful witness. Therefore, just as the 3.5 year duration of Jesus's ministry is identified with the course of the witnesses' ministry, so also the time of his apparent defeat at the end of his ministry is associated with the conclusion of their period of testimony. I don't know if I agree with that, but it was an interesting connection that he makes, that Jesus's earthly ministry was 3.5 years. And so I guess he's seeing that the church is kind of recapitulating that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know
I see what he's saying.
You know what's interesting in this text? That in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul keeps borrowing from Hosea over and over and over again. And we get this idea of the two witnesses here being resurrected on the third 3.5 day, whatever it is. Well, in Hosea 6:2, you get, after 2 days, he will revive us. On the third day, he will raise us up that we may live in his sight. I mean, that takes me back to the idea of the whole church deal, because those who were slain would be restored back to life, and it's spiritual life. And that seems to fit perfectly with Paul's concept of resurrection and Revelation 11's idea of the two witnesses, if it represents Christ, the church, corporate body, that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
So when you just said something, I just looked up this about the Herodians, and it says here that the Herodians, which is the political faction, would be considered the enforcers of Rome during the time of the war. They were local enforcers of Rome.
Yeah, but they come from the Edomites, don't they?
They do. They're Idumean. They're Edomites. But the
Yeah.
point is that they're still like within Judea. This is a Judean faction. I just noticed that.
James Jordan sees the little horn that wages war against the saints. He sees that as the Herodians, the Herodian dynasty, and he makes a really, really good case for that. And so it says the two witnesses were a torment to those who dwell on the land. Now, I favor B here, the Jews, but I think we could see how Rome hated Christians for not engaging in Caesar worship. But the Jews, I think this is primarily the point here, hated the Christian message of believing in Yeshua as Messiah and God, their testimony of the spiritual fulfillment of the Messianic kingdom, and even the Gentiles coming into this spiritual kingdom. So I think that's kind of who is really despising the testimony of these two witnesses.
Well, and that's the reason for the persecution. And I think that's why Jordan makes the connection to the little horn who's doing the persecuting in that fourth kingdom in Daniel chapter 7. I'm all day long B on that one.
Amen. I would agree with you. Now, this is the big one, and we could probably close with this one. They were raised and then taken up to heaven in a cloud. I love this. And then I love what your mind went exactly reminded, Ezekiel 37. They stood back up. That is, their testimony was vindicated, and the church survived and was raised out of the Great Tribulation period. In a similar way, God breathed on the slain of corporate Israel, and they lived and they stood up upon their feet. Ezekiel 37, 1 through 14. Now, they were caught up to heaven. This pictures the vindication and victory of the gospel over their enemies and being rewarded or caught up into the clouds or in God's most holy place presence. Matthew 24, 30 and 31, the catching away into the cloud at the sound of a trumpet. Remember, Revelation 11, we're at the sounding or the blowing of the seventh trumpet. So we have to harmonize this with Matthew 24, 30 and 31 and 1 Thessalonians 4, 15 and 16, and the blowing of the trumpet in 1 Corinthians 15. Notice what it was funny because I asked, do I not have it here? I don't. I asked Chilton a long time ago. I didn't get in here. I asked Chilton a long time ago, what was the hardest part of writing his commentary on Revelation? He said it was easy until I got to chapter 11. I had a quote of him. I don't know if one of you guys has his commentary, but he takes this as the church being seated in heavenly places or being in the cloud of witnesses in Hebrews 12 or Ephesians 2, right? We're seated in heavenly places. But that's the already of eschatology. That's not the not yet. This is the blowing of the seventh trumpet. This is the consummation. This is the judgment of the dead. So Chilton knew, I should be going to 1 Thessalonians 4. I should be going to Matthew 24, 30 and 31. I should be going to 1 Corinthians 15 and the blowing of that trumpet to bring these in harmony. But he was a partial preterist, a creedalist, and he couldn't do that. But we can make those connections.
You're all over that. That's good. This has to be the eschatological climax. And that's based on what's coming next week, where we're going to 15 to the end of it. I mean, it has to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the judgment of the dead. Absolutely. I didn't do much research on this. I'd be interested to see what you guys had. We still have a minute. What were your thoughts on this earthquake and a tent and the city fell and 7,000 died? Did you guys have any thoughts on that?
That's a Joel question right there. He's all over this.
I don't have anything real specific on that. I didn't look at that very much either.
Honestly, Mike, whenever you said we were going to stop at 14, I sent a giant I agree because I only got through about verse 12.
Okay.
This is a hard chapter for me.
This is something I wrote a long time ago, and I was trying to look at it. I didn't really get to study it again, but earthquake here is symbolic of the shaking and revolutions taking place within the Roman Empire. Rick, you had talked about that. And the Jews in the land of Palestine. Therefore, Jerusalem falling would represent a tenth of the shaking taking place within the entire area. I think the Roman Empire had control over 10 nations, if I'm not mistaken. That's why some people think the 10 horns on the beast. Anyway, the 7,000 died, 7 being the number of completion. The judgment was perfect in God's eyes. Or this is a reversal of 1 Kings 1:18, where God had reserved 7,000 that had been faithful to the covenant. Here, those Jews that were destroyed are the unfaithful ones to the covenant, and thus their judgment is perfect and complete. So that makes sense to me. But
so I looked up in Days of Vengeance on page 290 in regard to he said this visible ascension of the witnesses is another aspect of the public vindication of the church, demonstrating before all the world that the Christians, not the apostates, are the true heirs of the covenant promises. The persecuted and martyred Christians, despised and rejected by men, are declared to be the true temple, ascending into the cloud of God's glory. And he goes on here, as with Christ's ascension in Acts 1:9, the cloud here represents the divine glory, the cloud of the presence. Their ascension in the cloud is thus a testimony that they are in union with Christ, sharing in his exaltation and kingdom.
Yeah, but that doesn't happen in AD 30. That happens in AD 70 when he comes. That's when they're caught up in the cloud, in the glory cloud. So he saw it, especially at verse 18. He couldn't help but see Daniel 12, because when the city is judged is when the judgment and resurrection of the dead takes place. And this concept with the trumpet being blown, man, I mean, it's the consummation. There's no way out of that. Partial preterists just run into a brick wall in Revelation 11.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I like when we were talking about Rome earlier. Like as I was studying, I decided to go on this tangent, like, okay, so what is actually happening with Rome, at this time? And I'm looking at all this. So this chapter was a little difficult for me because I got to stay. I almost feel like I need to call you guys before we have the study, because I do, like, I kind of go down another path when I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I'm picking up some things that may be a little bit different.
That's fine. That's the way I think the study should be. Okay. I think we need to study our own thing and then come out of it and just kind of bounce things off of each other. And most of the time, I think we're going to agree. We all agree on the framework, right? It's just these little particulars and how it's fleshed out. And that's why I like this study so much. I think it's done really well.
Well, and I like how you see, that's the other thing about having a better understanding of Revelation. When you were looking at the earlier chapters and saying, hey, remember in chapter 3 or in chapter 7, and you're kind of recalling how this is coming through. Right. And then Zach bringing up Revelation 20. And then when as soon as he said it, I was like, bing, the light came on. Right. So I was like, okay, so I guess I just need to read all of Revelation every day and then come back.
Yeah,
it's hard to keep up. That was really sharp, Zach. Good job on you. And that was really nice about Jericho and stuff that you shared, Mike. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's Warren Gage's stuff, but I try and read and keep up with this stuff and God's providence. You know how it is. I mean, you'll be studying something and God will bring a book your way or whatever, and things just start connecting, and he just did a great job there. But he didn't have, because he's not a preterist, he could make these other connections, and we kind of give it a better picture. But
yeah. All right. Are all hearts and minds clear?
Yes, sir. I can't wait to get into verses 15 to 19 and talk about the judgment of the dead. But there's no way we could have fit that in, obviously. So Just worked out.
Yeah,
little tag
and
on at the end. Hey, the dead were judged. All right.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure about you guys and what you got going on, but next Sunday is Mother's Day, and I will be spending some time with my mother. So it might be a couple weeks before we get back. We'll just have to
You're
see.
such a mama's boy.
I love my mama, dude. I
know.
love my mama.
All right.
All right,
so
guys.
we may not be here next week, or we may. We'll see.
Yeah, unless maybe late. Maybe we could do it late. Maybe we could do it like 7 o'clock or something. I could probably make it work. All right.
Sounds good.
All right, guys. Well, I appreciate it, and we'll get into the last of Revelation 11 next time.
Amen.
See ya.
Bye for now, everyone.